Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member. I am the Reverend Mitch Hescox, President of the Evangelical Environmental Network. I'm also a board member of the National Association of Evangelicals, and I've been appointed to be a member of the Clean Air Act Advisory Committee by this current administration. We're here for a very simple reason: defend the right of every child, born and unborn, to fulfill their God-given potential. That quotation came from President Trump at the March for Life last week. While many in our community applaud the president's action in certain areas of being pro-life, his administration's effort to eliminate over 95 environmental standards questions the sincerity of his commitment to be completely pro-life. If President Trump truly wanted to defend the right of every child, born and unborn, to fulfill their God-given potential, then his actions must speak louder than his words, including the protecting of unborn children from mercury pollution. The president's record of destroying environmental health rules threatens every child's right to fulfill their God-given potential, what Jesus calls abundant life. Jesus was not just referring to a spiritual connection, but to a holistic understanding of well-being of body and soul together. Jesus was especially concerned about vulnerable populations being denied abundant life. And our commitment to Jesus Christ compels us to do all that we can to protect unborn children from mercury poisoning. In keeping with our commitment to the sanctity of life, over 145,000 pro-life Christians supplied comments last year against rolling back the MAT standard. In addition, over 120 evangelical leaders sent that message, which I hand-delivered to Acting Administrator Wheeler on December 4th, 2008. Before MATs, 1 in 6 children were born with threatening levels of mercury and brain damage. Mercury causes all sorts of adverse health effects, which you've heard from the other people, and I'm not going to repeat here today. Mercury is emitted from coal-fired power plants, is deposited back into the earth. It concentrates in fish in numbers that are 10 to 100 million times greater than the concentrations in water. And one thing I'd like to point out to the committee, when it comes to the health of children, they're not little adults. Their developing bodies leave them more vulnerable, and the most at risk are unborn children and newly born. And the good news, and you've heard it today, is that MAT works. Mercury pollution is lower, the compliance costs are down, women have less mercury, children have lower mercury levels, but the work isn't finished. Mercury fish consumption advisories remain in all 50 states, and still at least 200,000 children remain neurologically impacted each year from mercury. So why is this happening? Why is MATS under challenge? The Trump administration's MATS proposal would reverse EPA's finding that it's appropriate and necessary to regulate mercury. EPA Administrator Wheeler knows that removing the appropriate and necessary finding opens the door for energy developers to pursue lawsuits that overturn the standards, while he can sit there, in my opinion, play Pontius Pilate and say that he's not overcoming mercury, but the courts did. But even more than that, the most damaging element is that proposed changes would exclude co-benefits or ancillary benefits. This contradicts the guidelines we heard about that the George W. administration did. And it makes little sense, as we've also heard, to remove certain benefits just because how they're labeled. A baby's lungs don't know where PM 2.5 came from and what took it out, but they need to benefit from it. Changing the co-benefit standard is what I believe this entire underhanded process represents. And a member in a meeting in December 4 with Acting Administrator Wheeler at the time, he alluded to this by saying that we should have separate standards for different things. But even keeping with his underhandedness, I would really beg to differ with the person who preceded me. An oft-repeated untruth is the justification of the MATS role is that the Supreme Court required it. Bill Wareham told me that at a Clean Air Act Advisory meeting on September 28th. On that December 4th meeting, Acting Administrator Wheeler said the same thing. He did the same thing in the newspapers, and he even did it at his EPW confirmation hearing. But here's the truth. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit upheld MATS in its entirety, including the appropriate and necessary finding. The Supreme Court ruled that EPA had erred not in considering cost, making the appropriate necessary finding. Instead, what the majority expressed was that it left EPA to determine how to take that cost accounts and comparison benefits. Then the D.C. Circuit Court, without staying MATS, remanded the appropriate finding to EPA for reconsideration of the costs. The EPA new cost accounting was issued in a supplemental finding in April 2016. No further legal action was required. The MATS revision is categorically not to fulfill a request from the Supreme Court, but to try to establish a new precedent for not counting co-benefits and removing the appropriate and necessary finding that would cause havoc. I've been working on this rule for over 10 years. You can tell that I'm very passionate about it because I love onboard children, and I know my time has expired, so I will end there. But know that this action is a moral tragedy that the people of the United States, no matter your faith, no matter your beliefs, if you love a child or a grandchild, we cannot allow this to happen.
Thank you.